Hi there, Kevin McNew with Quantum Hedging with the Thursday, October 2nd Harvest Yield Analytics Report. This is the report where we look at how actual harvest yields are faring across the country based on commercial seed plot data. And what we see is kind of a continuation from the last few weeks' reports, which is not particularly great yields in some pockets of the country, especially in the key growing areas of Iowa. We'll come back to that, but there are some areas that are improving and showing good, solid yield results, mostly the Eastern Corn Belt as we get the early reports in. And Nebraska continues to fare pretty well, and we have yet to get really into some of the irrigated ground in Nebraska and Kansas that will push those yields up quite a bit further. So let's talk about Iowa. Last week we called out Iowa as potentially worth watching because early yields were very poor. They continue to stand up fairly poorly compared to last year. On average, seed plot yields out of Iowa are tacking at a 19 bushel reduction over last year, in comparison to what USDA projects, which is a 8 bushel increase to achieve the record yield peg of 219. So what do we make of that? Well, a couple of things. I do think the Iowa yield is at risk of coming down. We won't maybe get that number because of the USDA shutdown and the wider government shutdown. That's a risk. They usually are doing their survey in the 1st of October with a release date around October 10th for this month, I believe. So regardless of when we do open the government back up, in all likelihood, we won't get a yield number on October 10th. It will be pushed out for a while just for them to actually do the actual survey, much less release the data. So I think it's unlikely we will have a number in October. So we'll keep watching this without USDA as a benchmark to compare to. We'll use their September numbers. But what I know, or what I believe, I should say, is that we think yields will continue to improve. Our gap to the U.S. number is starting to shrink a little bit. The U.S. Yield number is pegged to be up 7.4 bushels per acre versus last year. That's where USDA is. Our seed plot yields versus last year are now only down 1 bushel over last year. That's a remarkable recovery from down 5 bushels last week. So we are starting to get into the better crop, is basically what I'm saying. So it's way too early and way too limited a data to make the conjecture that U.S. yields are going to be substantially down in future USDA reports. But I do think Iowa has the potential to be lower. Now, even if Iowa is lowered, which we all know Iowa is the #1 corn producing state, I want you to just kind of pause for a moment and just imagine, suppose that the numbers are really bad for Iowa and Iowa's yield is down 10 bushel from what USDA has. Let's say the USDA were actually to cut Iowa yields from 219 to 209, a 10 bushel an acre cut. What would that look like in terms of the U.S. yield? How much would our U.S. yield if just Iowa lost 10 bushel an acre on yield? That 10 bushel an acre Iowa yield, if we had it, a reduction would only trigger a 1.4 bushel reduction in U.S. corn yield. That's just the nature of the math. There's 13 million acres of harvested corn in Iowa, 90 some million across the U.S. So Iowa is big, no doubt about it, but even a hugely different Iowa yield number by itself doesn't do much to move the needle. My colleague Cy Monley keeps reminding me of that everywhere else in the country is really good. So even if we have one or maybe even 2 states that are off from the mark by USDA, it's unlikely we see massively lower yields. In other words, less than 180. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll see how the data comes in as we continue through the harvest season. Unfortunately, we won't have USDA data to maybe benchmark to, but I think this is hopefully helpful to you as you're thinking about crop marketing. And I think there's some maybe room for some supportive news out of yields this year as we enter the last part of the harvest season. We probably won't be surprised to the upside on yields. We'll be moving yields down. but maybe not enough to really change what is a pretty abysmal demand situation. So that's where we're at. Hope you enjoy the harvest yield analytics report. Make sure and sign up at quantum-hedging.com. Get it delivered to your inbox, as well as our AI model forecast every week. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.